Oil Products. James Diaria, I guess, Diaria, is that right?
Close.
Okay. Yeah, Jim has been involved in the petrochemical marketing and product line director for Universal Oil Products, processing technology and equipment. Jim has been with Universal Oil for 35 years and has held management positions in technology development, marketing strategy, planning, business development. He is currently responsible for marketing and product line management of Universal Oil Products licensed petrochemical and detergent technologies. Jim holds a BS degree in chemical engineering from the University of Notre Dame. Jim?
Thank you. See if I can get set up here. This is a bit of an experiment. Is that on? 3, 4, no, 3. Hey. Yeah, I'm gonna have to move this around. This is going to be a little fun trying to see if I can do this. Let me start by first offering Carlos Cabrera's regrets. He was supposed to give this presentation and in fact did all the work on it, and in the middle of last week got called to an urgent business meeting in Asia where he is now. So the flip side of that is I get the pleasure of talking to this group and going through this presentation. I've been with UOP, as you heard, for 35 years. I'm immensely proud of the company, so I'm real happy to talk to you about it. What I've got here is a timeline that's somewhat interactive in nature, and I've been playing around with this since I found out it was going to be here, so bear with me as I try to work my way through it. It'll be fun anyway. This year, UOP celebrates its 90th anniversary, and 10 years ago, at our 80th anniversary, we published this book. I don't know how many of you might have seen it. It's called Ideas for Rent. And it was a history of UOP, and obviously a lot of what is on this timeline was covered there also. The reason I mention this, though, is that the title of this book, Ideas for Rent, really is a pretty good description of UOP's core mission over the last 90 years. And that is we're dedicated to investment in innovation and development of new ideas, and then licensing of those ideas to others. We don't actually practice much of what we invent. A little bit of it we do, but much of it we don't. And we don't sell it to others. We rent it to them. So we keep ownership of the intellectual property, and we license to others the right to practice that, to use it, to produce their products. So obviously they're not going to pay us for any of this if it doesn't make sense and make good economic sense for them, and also be innovative. So our challenge has always been innovation over the years. So hopefully you'll get a flavor of that through this timeline here. What we're trying to capture here is just a quick overview of UOP's history. There's a number of pretty interesting and colorful characters. It's quite a bit of business up and down, some of it very down, some of it very up, as most of you probably experienced with your companies too. But kind of the overall theme running through this is a commitment to innovation and to continuing to come up with new technology to serve the hydrocarbon processing industry. So let me start here. Sorry. Turn this way. And the first thing we wanted to talk about is what we were calling the founding fathers. UOP started as a result of work by a fellow named Jesse Dubs. He was born and raised in western Pennsylvania in the late 1800s. And Jesse was a guy who always had a great curiosity about chemistry. At that point in time, of course, the oil business was just beginning, and at a very young age, he got involved in a number of inventions and activities in the oil industry. By his 30s, he was a pretty wealthy guy. He had created a couple of asphalt producing companies. He had some inventions and was doing pretty well. He decided that California might be an even better place to go, so around the turn of the century, he moved his family to Southern California, and again there established a couple of asphalt production companies. But he ran into a very curious problem there in that some of the crudes in the Santa Monica region were very, very heavy, so heavy that they would form emulsions with water, and at the time they were impossible to process. So Jesse, being a very inventive sort of guy, came up with a methodology for under temperature and pressure for treating this oil-water emulsion and separating it and rendering the oil then processable. And he applied for a patent in 1909 for what he called the Dubs dewatering process. Unfortunately for him, this happens with many entrepreneurs, his ups and downs were going down at that time, and by 1910 he was in big trouble. There had been a number of environmental disasters that had really caused a lot of problem with his refineries. He was embroiled in several lawsuits, and he was on the verge of bankruptcy. So Jesse had some beginning here, but had some real problems. Next key character here then is Jesse's son, Carbon Dubs. Jesse was a little eccentric. So, he named his son Carbon. You know, he was committed to this stuff. Then to top it off, Carbon thought that he needed a middle initial, so he created a middle initial. He called himself CP Dubs. But the P never stood for anything, but he became known in his career as Carbon Petroleum Dubs. And he carried on the family tradition and really picked up trying to save this company when they got in trouble around 1910. So CP actually found his way to Chicago and contacted a fellow named J. Ogden Armour, who owned the Armour Meatpacking Company and was a very wealthy man. Like many people with a lot of money at that time, they were very intrigued with this growing hydrocarbon industry. And Armour had actually established some asphalt producing companies in the Midwest. So I think Dubs probably thought, well, maybe you can invest in ours out in the West and save us. They negotiated for several years, and finally, in 1914, they came to an agreement where Armour bought out all of Jesse Dubs' holdings, including his intellectual property. Which also included this patent application, which had been bouncing around the patent office and never got anywhere for this dewatering process. Initially, this company was named the National Hydrocarbon Company, but shortly thereafter, they found there was another company with the same name on the East Coast, so they changed the name of the company to Universal Oil Products, and that was really the start of UOP, as it's known today. So 1914 was the kickoff of this. Let me mention a third key character now. I think this is probably the guy who convinced Armour to buy Dubs' company, because why would he buy a foundering asphalt company in California? Frank Belknap was Armour's chief patent counsel, and there was quite a rivalry among all of these very rich people at this point in time, and apparently Armour and John Rockefeller had quite a rivalry. And in 1912, Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company was granted a patent, a Burton patent, for the thermal cracking of crude oil to produce gasoline. And Belknap, when he was looking over what was in the Dubs estate, found that the Burton patent read in very many ways on top of the descriptions that were in Jesse Dubs' patent application. And the nice thing was, Dubs had 3 years priority on Burton, but Burton had a patent, Dubs didn't. So once they bought the company, Belknap put Armour's money and energy behind it, rewrote the patent application, and finally got a patent granted in 1915 for the Dubs now thermal cracking process. Same process, he just changed the intentions of it. And what ensued then was first an approach to Standard Oil about you're infringing, because Standard Oil by this time had built a number of these cracking units. Maybe you ought to take out a license. That was not a pleasant discussion. They eventually got into many years of lawsuits, which didn't end actually until 1930. But it was the start now of UOP. They had a patent. The next thing they needed to do was actually demonstrate this technology as a cracking technology. Dubs had only used it for dewatering, and in fact his facilities by now had been shut down in California. So they had CP Dubs work on developing this technology and designing it, and they dubbed it clean circulation. The basic idea was circulating some of the crack material back through the cracking coils to prevent coking. Armour gave CP Dubs the money to go build a demonstration unit in Independence, Kansas, which he did. He started up in 1919, And very good movie. He invited representatives from 14 different refineries to come and witness the startup. And he asked them, how long do you want me to run? And they told him, well, at least 2 weeks. So they ran for 2 weeks, shut it down, inspected the coils that were perfectly clean. They had a process. Shortly thereafter, there was the first unit was licensed at Roxana Oil Company in Wood River, Illinois, that later became owned by Shell. And they were off now licensing this technology. Let me move over here to the timeline, move forward a bit. Here it is. Last person to mention, Hiram Holley. He was an employee of Armour's, and once Armour bought Dubs' holdings and formed UOP in 1914, he appointed Holley as the president of the company. And this guy served as the president of the company for 30 years, till 1944. And he really set the whole tone for what UOP's mission and way of doing business was. And he's one of the real giants of the company. One of the first things he did is he said, we're going to get licenses and we're going to protect that intellectual property. So he very vigorously went after people who infringed his licenses, his patents. This wasn't always good. UOP got a reputation as a very litigious company during the times. And some of this actually came back to haunt him, because you don't always win your lawsuits. But he vigorously defended those patents and established the concept of intellectual property as the basic article of commerce for this new company. He recognized very early on that his main client base would be these independent refiners who didn't necessarily have access to the things that John Rockefeller was developing. So he really targeted them, brought this cracking technology to the independents, which of course didn't make him any more friendly with Rockefeller. But in order to do this, he had to offer some real confidence building measures to these independent refiners. So he said, well, number one, I'm going to ensure that you do not get sued, because there's a lot of lawsuits going on over this cracking technology at the time. So he offered indemnification from suit. This is something UOP still offers today for all our licensed technology. You license the technology from UOP. If anybody comes and sues you, UOP steps in, holds you harmless. So that was a reassuring step. The second thing he did is he said, if you license under us, we'll provide you with engineering design, we'll provide you with startup services, and we'll guarantee the unit. And if it doesn't work, we'll come in and fix it. He had to take some chances in doing this, but he had confidence in the technology, and I think he realized this was the only way this little upstart company could really get out there. So it actually became quite a success, and the Dubs cracking process was broadly licensed through the 20s and established UOP as a viable organization. Jump over here again. The next thing the second area that Holley really focused on was continuing development. He didn't want to just be a one-trick pony to have this cracking technology. So he established a research center in the suburbs of Chicago in a place called Riverside. Built it from grassroots, very nice brick, low-level buildings, a campus type of atmosphere with plenty of trees, and went out trying to recruit the top scientists that he could get to begin building this technology-based company. Key guy he got first was Gustav Egeloff. He became known as Gasoline Gus. He was actually the first chemist, professional chemist that UOP hired, and he was hired as the director of research at Riverside. He was quite an outgoing guy, apparently, a big promoter of UOP technology and a defender. He was a witness in many of their lawsuits, which I think is where he got the name Gasoline Gus. He also was a very strong recruiter of talent and a good judge of talent, and he spent a lot of time going around the world trying to find key scientists that could be brought into UOP. He brought in Hans Trotz, he brought in Vladimir Padiev, Herman Pines, and built a core of catalytic scientists that really was pretty new to the industry then, and provided a lot of the innovations that were to come in the 20s and 30s and 40s. So that was a very key move on the part of Holley to bring in Gus Egeloff. We jump ahead a few years now to the 30s. what was, as business progressed during the 20s, UOP was making quite a bit of money on this thermal cracking process. A number of the major oil companies eventually did agree to pay royalties to UOP. In fact, they were paying millions of dollars of royalties to UOP. And there were still a lot of lawsuits going on with the major oil companies. At the end of the 20s, in 1927, in fact, J. Ogden Armour died, and he, of course, was a major shareholder for UOP. I think at this point, the major oil companies saw an opportunity to resolve this issue of paying a lot of royalties and being involved in lawsuits with this little UOP company. They got together, the Seven Sisters, and offered to buy UOP from the Armour estate, which they did in 1930 for $25 million. Should go all the way back when Ogden Armour bought UOP from Doves. He paid $25,000 in 1914. So the value of the company went up quite a bit in that interim. Probably as a settlement with the Justice Department, I don't actually know this, but the 7 oil companies that owned UOP did maintain the company as an open licensing company. And I suspect they needed to do that in order to get permission for that. And they kept all of the key people in place. So this actually turned out to be a pretty good thing for UOP. They had a lot more source of funds now and still operated as an open licensing company. The oil companies got preferred access to the technology, of course. But it really ushered in a time where there was tremendous advances in catalytic science within UOP that were brought out to the industry. Let me jump over to that. Yeah, there we are. Under Ipatieff as the sort of catalytic director, he was part-time at UOP, and he was a professor emeritus at Northwestern University at the time. Particularly working under him was Herman Pines, and together they came up with and developed processes for acid-catalyzed reactions. These were now polymerization reactions, alkylation, isomerization, that were commercialized and licensed by the company. In addition, Dubs remained an active member of UOP and continued to perfect and develop the thermal cracking processes. And with the acquisition by the major oil companies, UOP worked with them, in particular with Standard Oil, on development and commercialization of fluid catalytic cracking. So you had quite a burst of catalytic processes here in the 30s and 40s. And when we got to World War II, a lot of these processes proved to be very key in terms of being used to produce very high-octane aviation gasoline that was, of course, strongly needed for the war effort. So a lot of innovation in catalysis occurred during that time frame. Now we jump after the war, we begin going into another down period. At the conclusion of World War II, I know the general feeling is the economy took off, everything boomed, but initially for UOP it was not a good time. There was tremendous demand for all of these processes to make high-octane aviation gasoline. That disappeared almost overnight at the end of the war. It took quite a while for the automobile industry to develop. In the meantime, a company that lives on licensing didn't have much income. So the fortunes began turning down. In addition, a couple of key lawsuits were lost at the time, which put a tremendous financial burden on UOP. So the 7 oil companies that owned the UOP were no fools. They said, gee, we've gotten what we can out of this. Let's get a tax write-off. They donated UOP to the American Chemical Society in 1944. And UOP was placed in trust under what was called the Petroleum Reserve Fund of the ACS. Petroleum Research Fund. Thank you. I knew there was an R in there. At this time, of course, also Hiram Holly died in 1944, and the Guarantee Trust went out and hired a fellow named David Harris from Arkansas to run the company. And again, here's another little-known but unsung hero of the company. He recognized the tremendous potential of all of this innovation and R&D capability, but he also saw the very negative financial impact of Holly's approach of suing anybody who he thought violated UOP's patents. So Harris decided to take a more business-like approach. He actually went out and negotiated with every one of the companies where there were differences of opinion or formal lawsuits, and settled all those suits. And he had a very innovative way of doing it. He said, well, look, if we settle on this, I'll give you preferred, or in some cases maybe even free access to future technology we develop. That's pretty clever. So now he's turned a competitor or an adversary into a future customer. And it actually turned out to be very good, because as UOP developed more technologies, it had people who had essentially credits who could commercialize these technologies. Once it's commercialized, it's a lot easier to sell it to the next guy. So Harris really turned the company around from a business and financial point of view. Fortunately, at the same time, there were some technology innovations that also came around. The big one here was catalytic reforming. A fellow named Vladimir Hensel started with UOP in the 30s, worked under Ipatiev, and in the mid-40s, he came up with this crazy idea of putting this very expensive platinum metal on alumina, and worked on developing what eventually became the platforming process for production of aromatics and high-octane gasoline out of naphtha. This was commercialized in 1949, and once the initial birthing problems were solved on the process, it was a huge hit. It made a lot of money for UOP, spread all over the world, and really made the company successful again. So we had another technology innovation, or a really revolutionary kind of technology innovation that not only changed the industry, but revitalized UOP's business, and a pretty sound business head at the top who resolved a lot of the conflicts that existed before. So jumping ahead maybe about a decade, with those successes, in 1959, the Guarantee Trust decided to launch UOP as a public company. Now had a good track record that cleaned up a lot of the financial problems. And so UOP was launched in 1959. The result of that was there was about $67 million went into the trust fund, the Petroleum Research Fund, as a result of the sale of UOP. And so UOP was off as a public company. At that time, David Harris retired. He had done his job to turn it around and launch it again. And a fellow named Pete Venema came in as president of the company. We're going into the 60s now, and the big trend, business trend in the 60s was diversify, become a conglomerate. And so this new public company did exactly that. In the end, I think it was probably not a financially sound thing to do, but who knew at the time. Venema, and followed by him, John Logan, as presidents, bought a lot of other companies that were in fragrances, automobile and truck seats, copper mines, tubing companies, all sorts of things. And the basic UOP company became called the UOP Process Division. So that activity still continued, and in fact prospered greatly. There were a number of additional inventions during this time. The continuous regeneration improvement on the platforming process came in that really was almost another step change in the capabilities of that technology. A whole string of technologies in aromatics processing, most notably the Parex process, which allowed low temperature liquid phase separation of paraxylene from mixed xylenes, all came in. So that the process division really prospered during this time, did very well. Unfortunately, the rest of the company didn't do quite as well. So we had a period of really, well, let me jump to it. I think we call it here the golden age, or the expanding portfolio, expanding technologies, where based in large part on the platforming technology that now made a lot of high purity aromatics available, the whole aromatics petrochemical industry grew. UOP grew along with it, with extraction technology, separation, isomerization technology, later developed ethylbenzene styrene technology, cumene phenol technology, all of which were offered for license. On the refining side, Merox treating technology, hydrocracking, further improvements in FCC. So it was quite an expansion of the technology portfolio, a lot of innovation coming in to the company at this point in time. But things got a little difficult with respect to the overall business. By the mid-70s, the conglomerate company was beginning to get into financial difficulties despite the successes of the process division. By 1978, the company was sold to Signal Companies, which ironically itself was an ex-oil company that became a conglomerate. Who knew? So Signal now owns all of UOP. What ensued was a series of ownership changes that seems to continue to this day. Signal eventually merged with Wheelabrator Fry, and then with Allied Signal, or with Allied Chemical to become Allied Signal. One of the key changes in UOP occurred after that merger with Allied Chemical. By the mid-1980s, Union Carbide, which had pioneered the development of synthetic zeolites and molecular sieves, had grown a molecular sieve division that they called the CAPS division. UOP was a very major customer of these molecular sieves. We used them in a lot of our catalysts. We used them in many of our separation processes. So there was a real connection between these two companies. Union Carbide saw opportunities to do the same thing themselves and began developing process technology using their molecular sieves, in some cases in direct competition with UOP. So during the mid-80s, Allied Signal actually approached Union Carbide and suggested that they'd like to buy their molecular sieve division, and Union Carbide approached Allied Signal and suggested they'd like to buy UOP. Neither company was interested in selling, so in 1988 they said, let's put them together in a joint venture partnership, which is what they did. And the UOP that exists today is essentially that company. It's the UOP that evolved from 1914 Process Licensing Company and the Union Carbide molecular sieve or CAPS division. It's now 16 years later. We've grown well. I think it's probably one of the few examples of a joint venture that actually turned out very well. Over that time, the ownership has changed. Still remains a 50-50 joint venture company, but of course, Allied Signal merged with Honeywell and became Honeywell, and Union Carbide was acquired by Dow and became Dow. So today, UOP is a 50-50 joint venture partnership owned by Honeywell and Dow, but still essentially the same structure that was put together back in 1988. And over that time frame, there's been a continual influence of the innovation culture. A lot of new technologies in the olefins area have come out. The company has expanded into treating and processing of natural gas. That kind of came together with some new technologies such as methanol to olefins, where we're now trying to convert natural gas to light olefins. There's been quite an investment in new capabilities such as combinatorial chemistry and new discoveries of molecular sieves, which is a hallmark of the carbide side of what is now UOP. In fact, there's a whole new family of molecular sieves designated UZMs that have recently been awarded to UOP. So today we got a company, let me just jump to the last of that. That's essentially the same structure that was put together 16 years ago in 1988, still focused on technology development and licensing of that technology, an ever-broadening field. We're about $1 billion company today, a little under 3,000 employees. We offer a little over 70 different licensed technologies, along with a wide array of catalysts, adsorbents, proprietary equipment that go together with that technology, and engineering and technical services that also go along with that. I found the first talk this morning very interesting about the future challenges. These are exactly the things we worry about. I totally agree that the refining technology is really very high up on that experience curve. We continually have to try to look for new ways to bring value to that industry. Petrochemical industry's got a little more dynamics to it, although it's still very, very difficult areas. A lot of the technologies are very high on the experience curve there too. So we're looking at things like better use of byproducts, alternative feedstocks, chemicals out of gas, for example, even beginning to look at renewables for chemicals and fuels, conversion of the very heavy material. The real challenges going into the next decade, I think, are those kinds of things, and we'll continue to invest in them and try to come out with innovations there. The basic company business model or philosophy is very similar to what Hiram Holly first outlined back in 1914. It's invest in innovation, put together something that others are interested in buying from you, give them the confidence to buy it and license it to them. And that's what we still do today. So that's kind of my quick story of UOP. I don't know if any of these are still available, but this is a really interesting book if you ever want to read it. And if we have time for questions.
Jim, how many Nobel Prize laureates either worked for the company or got their Nobel Prizes through UOP?
Jeez, that's a
Do you
good
know
question.
that?
I don't know. No, I don't know that.
Hans Trope
Tropes?
was one.
Yeah.
I was thinking about prizes. There's the Apodium Prize, which is one of the great prizes in the field of catalysis now.
Yes.
The company
Yes.
name. And then the most recent one, I think, is the late Val Hensel,
Right.
Received the Draper Prize last year.
Right. The other one I didn't mention, Edith Flanagan, who did a lot of her work with carbide, but continued to do work with UOP when she came in. I know she's received a lot of awards too. Yeah.
Great.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate your time.